Ethan had been working on the space station for 3 months. The job was simple enough: repairing ships, making sure they were ready for the endless travels of space. He had seen many different types of ships, from many different species. Most of them were strange and unfamiliar to him, with designs that didn't make sense to a human mind. But Ethan didn't care. He was here to do his work, keep his head down, and avoid getting involved in things that were none of his business. That was until the royal ship of the Volari arrived. The Volari were known across the galaxy as a powerful warrior race, their ships a symbol of strength and fear. Their species was strange, even by alien standards. Tall and graceful, with glowing patterns running along their skin, they looked more like living art than warriors. They were dangerous. Their history was filled with battles, and the galaxy respected, if not feared, their strength. Ethan wasn't scared of them, not at first anyway. He had worked with many aliens, and most of them were just people like anyone else. But when he first saw her, he froze. The princess of the Volari was everything the stories had promised: elegant, fierce, and undeniably regal. Her name was Kayla. He had heard her name whispered by the other station workers when they found out she was coming. It was said that she would one day lead her people, and many believed she was as ruthless as she was beautiful. Ethan's first encounter with her was nothing like what he had imagined. He was working on the hull of a broken-down freighter when he heard the unmistakable sound of heavy boots on metal. The air around him seemed to shift, as if the space station had suddenly grown colder. He looked up, and there she was, Princess Kayla, walking towards him with a group of guards in tow. She was tall, with skin that shimmered like it was made of starlight. Her eyes were a deep shade of violet, intense and unblinking as they fixed on him. Her clothing was simple yet elegant, a black tunic with silver accents that marked her status. She didn't walk, she glided, like she was above everything around her. It's like nothing on this station could touch her. Ethan quickly stood up and wiped his hands on a rag, his mind racing. He had no idea why she was here or what she wanted. His training had never prepared him for an encounter with royalty, especially not one as fierce as the Volari. But he was a professional, so he did what he always did when faced with the unknown. He asked questions. "Can I help you, Princess?" asked, his voice a little more unsure than he meant it to be. Kayla stopped just a few feet from him. The air around them felt tense, almost like the universe was holding its breath. The guards behind her were silent, their eyes fixed on Ethan with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Kayla's eyes scanned him, not in a polite way, but as if she were inspecting a tool or a piece of equipment, something to be judged. Her voice was sharp, like a blade cutting through the quiet. "You are the human mechanic, yes?" she asked, her words slow and deliberate. Ethan nodded, trying to remain calm. "Yes, Princess. I'm here to make sure your ship is repaired and ready to go." There was a long pause, and then Kayla took a step closer to him. Her gaze was unwavering, and Ethan could feel the weight of it, like she was seeing through him, measuring him in a way that made his heart race. She tilted her head slightly, as if contemplating something. Then, without warning, she spoke again, her words both surprising and confusing. "Don't just stare. Touch me, human," she commanded, her voice low and clear. Ethan's eyes widened, and for a moment he wasn't sure if he had heard her correctly. What did she mean? He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His brain scrambled to make sense of what she had just said. Touch her. Why? Was this some kind of cultural thing? A test? Command? He could feel the eyes of her guards on him now, waiting for his response. He cleared his throat, trying to get his thoughts in order. "Pardon me, Princess, but I don't understand," he said slowly. "I'm just here to fix your ship." She cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Do you not know Volari customs, human?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Ethan blinked, not sure if this was a joke or a serious question. He shook his head. "I'm afraid I don't," he said, feeling embarrassed. "I've never worked with Volari before." Kayla studied him for a moment, and then, with a small sigh, she explained. "In Volari culture, physical contact is a sacred act. To touch someone is to share a bond, a connection that cannot be taken lightly. Only those who are worthy, those who understand the strength of touch, are allowed this privilege. Softened slightly, though it was still commanding. You have been chosen to help me, human, and I will not have you merely stare at me. If you are to be of use to me, you will learn our ways. Ethan was stunned. He had never heard of anything like this before. But he was a professional, and he wasn't about to back down from a challenge, especially not in front of an alien princess. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to do, but if it meant completing the repairs and not losing his job, he would try to figure it out. I'll do what I can, princess, he said, though his voice was more uncertain than he wanted it to be. Kayla seemed pleased with his answer. She nodded once, sharply, and then turned to her guards. Leave us, she ordered. I will handle this myself. The guards exchanged uneasy glances, but obeyed without question. As they walked away, Kayla looked back at Ethan. You will learn quickly, she said, almost as if speaking to herself. Ethan nodded, trying to mask his discomfort. He had no idea what he had just agreed to, but he knew one thing for sure. This was not going to be an ordinary job. Ethan was beginning to understand just how different his life on the space station was going to be now that Princess Kayla had entered it. He had worked with many species, fixing ships and solving problems, but nothing in his training had prepared him for an encounter with a royal Volari. And certainly nothing had prepared him for her. Kayla was unlike any woman he had ever met. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. There was something about her presence that made the whole room feel smaller, as if nothing else mattered. When she was near, her eyes were sharp, unblinking, and seemed to see straight through him. But it wasn't just her beauty that left Ethan shaken, it was the weight of her words, her commands. When she had told him to touch her, the words had rattled him more than he cared to admit. He had been around a lot of strange aliens, but the Volari had customs and expectations that seemed impossible to understand. He hadn't expected his first day with Kayla to be so difficult. But here he was, standing in front of her once again, unsure of what he was supposed to do. The ship was damaged, and Ethan's job was simple enough. Fix it. But fixing things on a Volari warship was like nothing he had ever done before. The ship was built for power, for strength, not for easy repairs. The systems were intricate, far more complicated than anything he had worked on before. Still, he wasn't worried. He was a mechanic, and he could fix almost anything. But it was the presence of the princess that made him uneasy. How could he focus on his work when she was standing over him, watching his every move? Kayla stood by his side, observing. Ethan could feel her eyes on him, not in a way that made him nervous, but in a way that made him feel as though he was being tested. It wasn't just about the ship anymore. It was about her. It was about proving that he was worthy to be in her presence, worthy to touch her. Her words echoed in his mind. Don't just stare. Touch me, human. He wasn't sure what she meant, or why she had said that, but he knew it was a challenge. And somehow, he had to find a way to rise to it. Your people are strange, Kayla said, breaking the silence. Ethan glanced up, surprised by the sudden comment. What do you mean? You are curious, but you don't ask the right questions. You are too focused on the task at hand. She tilted, her head studying him. You must learn to see beyond what is in front of you. You must understand the power of touch. Ethan frowned, not fully understanding. Power of touch, repeated. Kayla nodded. Yes, among my people, touch is sacred. It is not just an act. It is a bond, a connection between two beings. It is how we communicate strength and trust. She stepped closer to him, her presence commanding. You human must learn to respect this. Ethan wasn't sure how to respond to that. He was used to fixing ships, not learning about the sacred rituals of an alien race. But there was something in Kayla's voice, something that made him want to understand. Maybe it was her confidence, her authority, or maybe it was something deeper. Whatever it was, Ethan couldn't ignore it. Okay, he said, trying to sound confident, even though he felt anything but. I'll learn. I still don't understand why you wanted me to touch you. He could feel his face heat up, but he forced himself to stay calm. I mean, I'm here to fix your ship. I don't know anything about your customs. Kayla studied him for a long moment, her eyes never leaving his. You think it is simple, don't you? she asked softly, almost as if speaking to herself, that you can just fix things and move on. But it's never that simple. Not for me, and not for you. She paused, then added, you are not just a mechanic human, you are a bridge between your people and mine. Ethan didn't know what to say. The idea of being some kind of bridge between Earth and the Valari seemed ... impossible. He was just a guy who knew how to fix things. But Kayla wasn't finished. You will learn, she said firmly. I will teach you, but only if you are willing to listen and accept the truth of our ways. You will learn how to touch, how to feel, and you will understand what it means to be a part of something greater than yourself. Ethan's mind was racing. This was a lot to take in. He had expected his job to be straightforward. Fix a ship, get paid, and move on. But now, everything was different. It wasn't just about the ship anymore. It was about Kayla, her people. In a strange new world of customs and rituals he didn't understand, he nodded, trying to hide his confusion. I'll try my best, Princess, he said, though he wasn't sure what he was agreeing to. Kayla seemed pleased with his answer. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod before turning back to the ship's control panel. Good. Now, let us begin. The hours passed, and the two of them worked together in silence. Ethan focused on the ship, trying to ignore the tension in the air. Every time he had to touch something, every time his hands brushed against the controls, or the ship's surfaces, he couldn't help but think about Kella's words. Touch is sacred. What did that mean? How was he supposed to learn this? Was there a right way to touch? A wrong way? Kella's presence was overwhelming. She moved with grace, her steps silent, her eyes always on him. Every so often, she would speak, offering little pieces of wisdom about the Valari way. She didn't explain everything, but she gave just enough for Ethan to feel like he was beginning to understand. Slowly, bit by bit. At one point, as they worked on the ship's main reactor, Kayla placed her hand on the control panel, right next to his. Ethan's heart skipped a beat, and he froze. He had expected her to keep her distance, but she was standing so close now, her skin glowing softly in the dim light of the ship. Her hand was just inches from his, and he could feel the heat radiating from her. Her touch wasn't what he expected. Wasn't cold or distant, as he had assumed it might be for someone so high-ranking. Instead, it was warm, alive, full of energy. Now you understand, Kayla said, her voice soft but firm. Touch is more than an action. It is a transfer of power, a way of sharing who we are. Must understand this, Ethan. Looked at her hand, still resting on the panel. For a moment, he hesitated. Then slowly, he placed his hand next to hers. The moment their hands made contact, something shifted. It was like a spark of energy passed between them, an unspoken connection that neither of them had expected. Ethan felt it, a rush of warmth spreading through his body, making him feel more alive than he had ever felt before. Kayla didn't look at him, but she didn't need to. She knew that Ethan was beginning to understand. This was the power of the Valari, the power of touch, and now he was part of it. The days after the first touch were strange for Ethan. He had never thought that something as simple as touching a control panel could change so much. He kept replaying the moment in his mind when his hand had brushed against Kella's, and that strange energy had passed between them. It wasn't like anything he had ever felt before. It was as if a door had opened inside him, revealing something new, something he didn't fully understand. And yet there it was, undeniable. The ship was still a mess of broken parts. And Ethan spent most of his time in the engine room, working to fix what had been damaged in the recent battle. But every time he glanced over at Kayla, she was watching him, her violet eyes never leaving him. There was something about the way she looked at him that made him feel both nervous and alive, as if she could see straight through him, reading his every thought. They didn't speak much during the next few days. Kayla had a way of making her presence known without saying a word. She was always there, moving silently through the corridors, watching him work. Ethan had never been a man of many words, but her silence made him uncomfortable. He had no idea what she was thinking, or why she was so intent on him learning her customs. But there was one thing he knew for sure. She was no ordinary princess. There was power in her, an undeniable strength that came from something deeper than her position or her beauty. Ethan was used to working with machines, but dealing with Kayla was a whole different thing. She was a puzzle he couldn't quite figure out. Every time he thought he was beginning to understand her, she would do something that threw him off course. One evening, while he was alone in the engine room, Kayla entered. Ethan had been working on a power conduit, and he didn't hear her approach until her voice broke the silence. "How are the repairs coming along?" she asked, her tone calm. Yet there was something in it that made Ethan's heart race. It wasn't a question. Of curiosity, it was a command, and she expected an answer. "Slow," Ethan replied, wiping his forehead with a cloth. "There's a lot of damage, and the parts we need aren't exactly easy to find, but I'll get it done." Kayla didn't move. She just stood there, watching him, her arms folded across her chest. The silence between them stretched on, thick and heavy, until Ethan couldn't stand it any longer. "Is there something you need, princess?" he asked, his voice tinged with impatience. Her eyes never left his. "I need you to understand," she said softly. "Not just the ship, but me. You are here for a reason, Ethan, and you must learn what it means to be in my presence." Ethan stopped what he was doing and turned to face her, feeling the weight of her words. "What does that mean?" he asked, his voice low. "What are you trying to tell me?" Kayla stepped closer to him, her movements fluid, almost as if she were gliding through the air. "It means you must understand the power of your touch," she said, her voice steady. "Your people think of touch as a simple thing, a greeting, a gesture, but it is so much more than that. When we touch, we share a part of ourselves. We make a connection that goes beyond words, beyond anything else." Ethan frowned. "I don't get it. You want me to touch you too?" "What? Prove something?" Kayla's eyes softened just for a moment. "No, you misunderstand. You don't touch for power or for gain. You touch to communicate, to connect. It is a bond between two beings, a way of understanding each other without words." Ethan wasn't sure if he believed her. He'd always thought that people touched for affection, for comfort, or for something physical. The idea that touch could be more than that felt strange to him. But he was here to fix a ship, not to analyze alien customs. So he nodded, though the confusion in his chest still remained. "I'll do what I can," he said, trying to sound confident. Kayla nodded, a small, knowing smile crossing her face. "Good. But I need more from you, Ethan. You cannot simply repair the ship and walk away. You must prove your worth." Ethan stared at her, unsure of what she meant. "Prove my worth? I'm just here to fix your ship. I didn't come here to what?" Kayla interrupted, her voice rising slightly. "To what, human? To do your work and leave? To pretend that nothing has changed? You are already part of something greater than yourself. Don't deny it." Her words were like a punch to the gut. Ethan didn't know how to respond. He had always thought of himself as just a mechanic, a small cog in a large machine. But Kayla was right. Something had changed. The moment their hands had touched, something had shifted. And now, he was caught in the middle of it, unsure of what to do next. Kayla stepped closer to him, her presence overwhelming. "Just a mechanic, Ethan. You are a part of this mission, part of my journey, and you will be with me, for better or worse, until it is done." Ethan felt the weight of her words, the pressure building in his chest. He wanted to deny it, to walk away and pretend that none of this mattered. But he couldn't. He was already in it, already connected to her in a way that he couldn't explain. And for the first time since he had arrived on this station, he realized that he wasn't just fixing a ship. He was fixing something far greater than that. Something he didn't fully understand yet, but that he would have to. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. "I'll do whatever I can," he said, his voice steady. "But I don't know if I can prove anything to you." Kayla's eyes softened again, though there was still a sharpness to them. "You will, Ethan, you will. And when you do, you will understand." The repairs were taking longer than expected. The damage to the ship had been extensive, and every time Ethan thought he had made progress, something else went wrong. He had never worked on something so advanced, and the Volari technology was unlike anything he had ever seen. The systems were built for strength and endurance, not easy repairs. But Ethan was determined. He wasn't going to let the ship fall apart on his watch. Kella's presence was a constant in the background, and it was hard to ignore. She moved through the ship with the grace of someone who had spent her whole life in command. She seemed to always be watching, always waiting for him to make a mistake. At least, that's how it felt. He couldn't figure out if she was judging him or if she was simply studying him. Despite his frustration with the repairs, there was something about Kayla that intrigued him. He didn't understand it, but every time she was near, something inside him stirred. Her beauty, her strength, the way she carried herself, it all seemed so ... otherworldly. And yet, there was a vulnerability in her eyes when she thought no. One was looking, a softness that Ethan wasn't sure anyone had seen but him. He hadn't expected any of this. He had thought he was just here to fix a ship. But now, it felt like the repairs were secondary to something much bigger, something he wasn't sure he was ready to face. One evening, while Ethan was in the engine room trying to align the power, Kayla entered. Hadn't heard her approach, but then again he rarely did. She was like a shadow, silent, commanding, impossible to ignore. "You are working late," Kayla said, her voice cutting through the silence. There was no accusation. In her tone, just a statement. Ethan looked up from the power core he was working on. His hands were covered in grease and oil, and he had been at it for hours. "Yeah, well, these things don't fix themselves," he replied, wiping his hands on a rag.
Ow.
"There's still a lot of damage." Kayla stepped closer, her eyes scanning the machinery around him. "You are dedicated," she said. "I'll give you that." Ethan couldn't help but feel a small sense of pride at her words. The Volari didn't give praise easily, especially not to someone like him. He wasn't a warrior, he wasn't royalty. He was just a human mechanic, a small part of a much larger world. But for some reason, Kella's approval seemed important. It made him feel like maybe he wasn't as insignificant as he had once thought. "It's my job," he said simply. "I'll fix it, don't worry." Kayla nodded, her eyes lingering on him for a moment longer than usual. "It is more than just a job, Ethan. You are part of something greater now. You cannot pretend that you are simply here to fix a ship and then leave." Ethan felt his stomach tighten at her words. He didn't want to admit it, but she was right. Every day, it became harder to deny the growing connection between them. The touch, the silence, the way her presence affected him, it was all starting to feel real. And he didn't know what to do with it. "Maybe," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, "but I'm still just a mechanic. It's all I know how to do." Kayla studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she reached out, her hand brushing against his. Ethan froze. He had expected it, but it still took him by surprise. There was that strange energy again, that spark of connection, that he couldn't explain. Her touch was warm, her skin soft, and for a moment everything else seemed to fade away. "You are more than that," Kayla said softly. "More than a mechanic, more than just a human. You have strength within you, Ethan. I see it. That's why I chose you." Ethan didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to being the center of anyone's attention, let alone someone like Kayla. He had always been a quiet, ordinary guy, just trying to get by. And now, here he was, on a strange alien ship, with a princess who seemed to see something in him that he didn't even understand. "I don't know what you see in me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just trying to do my job." "I'm not some hero, Kayla." Kayla smiled, but it wasn't the cold, distant smile she usually wore. This one was different, softer, almost ... understanding. "I don't need to be a hero," she said. "You just need to be yourself." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Ethan felt something shift between them, like a thread pulling them closer. It wasn't a huge change, but it was enough to make him question everything he thought he knew about himself, about her, about the situation they were in. Suddenly, the quiet was broken by the sound of alarms blaring through the ship. Ethan's heart jumped, and he immediately stood up, wiping his hands on his pants. "What's happening?" he asked, looking toward Kayla. She was already moving, her face set in a mask of determination. "We've been detected. Draxan ships are approaching. They've found us." Ethan's stomach dropped. The Draxan were the Velari's enemies, a ruthless and brutal species that lived for war and conquest. They were known to be merciless, and the Velari had barely escaped their last encounter. If they were coming after them again, it meant they were in serious trouble. "We need to get the shields." "Online," Ethan said, already moving toward the control panel. "I can help with that, but we'll need more power than we've got." Kayla nodded. "We do what we can. But there is something more important than shields right now, Ethan." Ethan looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" Kayla's eyes were fierce, her posture strong and commanding. "You must be ready. When the Draxan arrive, we will fight. But I will not lead this fight alone. You will fight beside me." Ethan's heart raced. He had never been in battle, never even held a weapon. But now Kayla was telling him he had to fight. He opened his mouth to protest, but she silenced him with a raised hand. "I'm not asking you to fight like a Velari warrior," she said, her voice low but firm. "I'm asking you to stand with me, to show them that humans are not weak, that you are more than what they think you are." Ethan didn't know what to say. He wasn't a soldier. He was just a guy who knew how to fix things. But standing beside Kayla, in that moment, he realized that he couldn't back down. Not when it mattered. Not when she was asking him for something he didn't understand, but felt he needed to give. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "I'll stand with you." Kayla gave him a sharp nod, then turned to the crew. "Prepare for battle," she commanded. "We fight together, or we don't fight at all." Ethan watched as the Velari crew sprang into action, moving quickly and efficiently. He felt a sense of awe at how easily they fell into place, how they were so in tune with each other, like a well-oiled machine. He wasn't sure how he would fit into all of this, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to leave Kayla's side. Not now, not ever. As the ship powered up for battle, Ethan's thoughts were racing. He wasn't a fighter, but Kayla had chosen him. She had chosen him to stand with her, to fight with her. And for the first time in his life, Ethan didn't feel like just a mechanic. Felt like he was part of something much bigger. The ship's alert systems blared louder, sending a jolt of adrenaline through Ethan's body. He could feel the vibrations of the ship's engines powering up beneath his feet. The crew moved in synchronized steps, preparing for battle. Atmosphere was thick with a mixture of focus and anticipation. The Velari were seasoned warriors, but this time they were facing a different kind of challenge, an enemy they had barely escaped from before, a human who had no business being. In a battle, Ethan wasn't sure what to expect. He had worked on ships his entire life, but he had never been in a real fight. He had always been the one to stay behind the scenes, fixing things, staying out of danger. But now, here he was, standing alongside Princess Kayla, who had just told him that he would be fighting. The weight of that responsibility felt heavier than he had anticipated. Kayla stood next to him, her expression calm but determined. She had been preparing for this moment her whole life. As a princess and heir to the Velari throne, she had trained for war since she was a child. The Draxan were a threat to her people, and she wasn't going to let them take what was hers. But it wasn't just about her people anymore. Ethan was part of her mission now, part of her journey. And he had already proven that he wasn't just a helpless human. "We stand together, Ethan," Kayla said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "The Draxan will not expect a human to fight, but that will work to our advantage." Ethan nodded, trying to ignore the pounding in his chest. He wasn't a warrior, and he had no idea what he was doing, but Kayla had believed in him. She had chosen him for this moment, and he couldn't let her down. "We fight together," he repeated, his voice more confident than he felt. "What's the plan?" Kayla's eyes shone with determination. "First, we'll need to disable their ship's communication system. If we can disrupt their ability to coordinate, we can take them out one by one." She looked at Ethan, her gaze unwavering. "You'll be with me on this, Ethan. We'll move quickly and take them by surprise." Ethan's stomach twisted with nerves, but he didn't hesitate. "All right, I'll follow your lead." The alarms continued to blare as the Draxan ships closed, in their massive forms appearing on the ship's sensors. The screens flickered with images of enemy vessels, their dark, angular shapes looming ominously in the vastness of space. Ethan couldn't help but feel a wave of fear wash over him. He wasn't ready for this. He wasn't prepared. But there was no turning back now. Kayla stepped forward, her presence commanding. She didn't wait for anyone else. The Valari crew followed her lead, moving with precision and purpose, as if they had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. Ethan, though, still felt like an outsider and untrained man thrown into a battle he didn't understand. "Stay close to me," Kayla said, her voice low but firm. "We need to move quickly. I'll handle the main controls. You focus on the weapon systems. Do you understand?" Ethan nodded, his heart racing. He had no experience with weapons, but he had seen enough ships in his time to know how to use them. "I understand," he said, trying to push the panic away. They moved to the central command area, where the weapon systems were controlled. Ethan felt the weight of Kella's gaze as she guided him through the ship's nerve center. He could sense the trust she had in him, and he wasn't about to let her down. This was more than just a job for him now. This was a test of his strength, his courage, and his loyalty. Kayla had chosen him, and he couldn't fail her. As they reached the control panel, Kella's fingers moved quickly over the buttons, activating the ship's weapons. The Valari ship trembled under the impact of the Draxan's initial attack, but it held strong. Ethan could feel the force of each blast, but he stayed focused. He knew Kayla was depending on him. "Now," Kayla commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We need to disrupt their communication systems. I'll handle the shields. You take care of the jammer." Ethan moved quickly, his hands flying over the controls. He had never worked with these systems before, but he wasn't about to let Kayla down. He had been trained for this moment. His whole life had led to this. The Draxan were a threat. Kate, and he wasn't going to let them take everything he had worked for. His fingers found the jammer control, and he activated it. The screens flickered again, and then the familiar sound of static filled the air. Communication systems were down. Ethan had done it. "Good," Kayla said, her voice filled with pride. Now we moved to the next phase. The battle raged on, but the tide had turned. Without their ability to communicate, the Draxan ships were scattered and disorganized. The Valari crew fought with precision, their coordinated attacks devastating. The enemy won by one. Ethan had never seen anything like it. The way the Valari moved, the way they fought it, was like they were part of the ship itself, like the ship was an extension of their bodies. They didn't hesitate. They didn't fear. But Kayla was different. She wasn't just a warrior. She was a leader, and every move she made was deliberate. She led from the front, her every action calculated to bring victory. Ethan couldn't help but be in awe of her. She was everything he had never known a leader could be: strong, intelligent, and yet in some moments, vulnerable. He saw it in the way her eyes softened when she looked at him. It was a fleeting moment, but it was enough for him to know that there was more to her than the fierce princess he had first met. "Stay focused," Kayla reminded him, breaking him from his thoughts. Ethan nodded. He was focused. He had to be. The battle was far from over. But now, for the first time, he felt like he was truly part of something. He wasn't just a human mechanic. He was fighting beside Kayla, beside the Valari, against an enemy that threatened everything they had built. And somehow, that made him feel stronger than he had ever felt before. The Draxan were starting to retreat, their ships faltering under the onslaught of the Valari. The tide had turned, and victory was within their grasp. Ethan knew that the battle wasn't won yet. There was still danger, still a chance that the Draxan could regroup and come back stronger than before. "We're not finished yet," Kayla said, her voice steady, despite the chaos around them. "We finish this now." With her command, the Valari ship moved in for the final strike. Ethan's hands were shaking as he worked the controls, but he didn't stop. Couldn't. Not now. He had come too far. Kayla moved beside him, her eyes never leaving the screen as the Draxan ships grew smaller in their view. "We fight for our people," she said softly. "We fight because we are Valari, And we fight because you are with us, Ethan. Ethan's heart skipped a beat at her words. He had never expected to be part of something so important. But now, here he was, fighting beside her. Standing as equals. The final shots rang out, and the last of the Draxan ships were destroyed. The battle was over. The Valari had won. Ethan sat back in his seat, breathing heavily, his body still buzzing. With adrenaline, he wasn't sure what to feel. Relief? Pride? Fear? All of it was there mixed together. But through it all, one thought echoed in his mind: he had done it. He had fought. And he had done it for Kayla. She turned to him, her face expressionless for a moment before a small, knowing smile appeared on her lips. "You did well," she said. Ethan looked at her, still trying to process everything that had just happened. "We did it together," he said simply. Kayla nodded, her eyes meeting his with a warmth that made his chest tighten. "Yes, together."